May 10, 2026. The Khumbu Icefall. 4 a.m. A Nepali high-altitude worker climbs in the dark toward Camp 1. He has summited Mount Everest multiple times. He has buried friends on this mountain. He moves the way veterans move, steady, almost bored. Then he stops. He sits down in the snow. He doesn't get up. Roughly 33 hours later, the Lhotse Face. Night. A 20-year-old Sherpa leaves Camp 2, carrying a load toward Camp 3. The face above him is steep, blue, frozen. The fixed rope runs up its spine like a thread. At 11:20 p.m., near 7,000 meters, he unclips. He takes a single step. The same morning, Makalu, just below Camp 3, a 53-year-old American woman is descending from a summit she reached the day before. She looks to her left. The slope cracks. All three were on different mountains. All three were surrounded by the best safety systems modern Himalayan climbing has ever built. And in the same 48 hours, every single one of those systems failed. This is the deadly pattern behind the 2026 Himalayan climbing season. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. Viewer discretion is advised. His name was Bijay Ghimire Bishwakarma. He was from Solududkunda municipality in the Solukhumbu district, the Everest district, where the mountain is not a postcard, it's the economy. He wasn't born to it. He climbed his way in. He wasn't a foreign client paying $80,000 to ride a rope. He wasn't a social media tourist looking for a profile picture above the clouds. He wasn't a man who saw Everest for the first time at base camp. By the time he died, Bijay Ghimire Bishwakarma had stood on the summit of Mount Everest multiple times, and the very first of those summits, back in 2017, made history. He was the first climber from Nepal's Dalit community, the caste at the bottom of a social system Nepal has spent decades pretending it has dismantled, to reach the top of the world. After his own summit, he wasn't satisfied being the only one. In 2019, he climbed back up with Gyanmala Ranapal and helped her become the first female Dalit summiteer in his country's history. He was 35 years old. He had a family. He had a YouTube channel where he showed other Dalit kids what was possible. He had become a respected high-altitude worker on the most dangerous mountain on Earth, in an industry that for generations had not let people from his community in. By spring 2026, his life was the closest a kid from a Dalit family in the Solukhumbu ever gets to perfect. May 10th, 2026. The 2026 Everest season was already broken before it began. Nepal had issued a record number of Everest permits, roughly 500 climbers on a single mountain. It was the first season under the new $15,000 foreign permit fee, which had been expected to slow things down. It hadn't. The China side of the mountain was closed, which meant every Everest climber on the planet was funneled onto a single route, the south side, out of Nepal. And that route ran straight through the Khumbu Icefall, the most dangerous stretch of any commercial 8,000-meter climb anywhere on Earth. The Icefall is not a slope. It is a frozen waterfall the size of a small city, moving downhill in slow motion. Imagine a slow-motion avalanche the size of a neighborhood. Except the avalanche is happening underneath you as you walk across it. Towers of ice the size of apartment buildings, called seracs, lean and crack and collapse without warning. The route through it has to be rebuilt at the start of every season by a tiny team of Sherpas called the Icefall Doctors. They lay aluminum ladders across crevasses, fix rope across faces, and try to thread a path that won't be standing under the wrong piece of ice at the wrong moment. In 2026, the wrong piece of ice arrived early. A serac roughly 100 feet tall loomed over the route and refused to fall. The Icefall Doctors finally pushed the path through to Camp 1 on April 28th, late by Everest standards. From that day on, every team on the mountain was playing catch-up. Acclimatization rotations, gear carries, summit prep. All of it compressed into a narrower and narrower window, with hundreds of climbers stacking up below. This was the season Bijay Ghimire Bishwakarma was climbing into. For weeks he had done what high-altitude workers always do. Move up, move down, build red blood cells, ferry oxygen and tents and food up to the high camps so that, when the clients arrived, the mountain would already be set for them. On the night of May 9th, he was at Camp 1, just above 6,000 meters, preparing to push higher the following day. Around 4 a.m. on May 10th, he fell ill. The reports from his teammates are quiet and short. Cardiac symptoms, difficulty breathing. The kind of episode that, at sea level, gives you minutes to call an ambulance. At 6,000 meters, in a nylon tent on a moving glacier before sunrise, it gives you almost no chance at all. His teammates and other climbers in the area began the descent with him. They worked back through the icefall, the same maze he had crossed dozens of times in his career, trying to get him low enough, fast enough, for oxygen and rescue to matter. He did not make it to base camp alive. Lukala police reported that he died while being brought down. The initial cause listed was suspected cardiac arrest, with altitude sickness as the likely underlying factor. His body was airlifted from base camp by helicopter and flown to Kathmandu, where authorities sent it for post-mortem. He was the second climber to die on Everest in the 2026 season. He was the first man from his community ever to stand on the summit of the world's highest mountain. He was a husband, he was a father, he was 35 years old, and he died in the dark before sunrise, on the same stretch of ice he had crossed safely hundreds of times before, on a mountain he understood better than most of the people running expeditions on it. How does a man who has stood on the summit of Mount Everest more than once, who has crossed the Khumbu Icefall more times than most people have driven to work this year, die in the most familiar stretch of his entire career? The official report will probably say cardiac arrest. Some accounts will say altitude sickness. Both can be true at the same time. At 6,000 meters, the human heart is working at the edge of its design envelope every minute of every day. Add fatigue from a delayed season. Add a 4 a.m. push in cold, thin air. Add the cumulative wear of multiple Everest summits on a body that has never been allowed to recover all the way. The line between physically fine and dying in a tent is thinner than anyone wants to admit. But that is only the surface. Underneath, there are other questions. Why was a high-altitude worker pushing through the icefall at 4 a.m. in the most compressed season Everest has ever seen? Why did that season feel normal to anyone who wasn't inside it? I don't know. But what happens when the climber who dies isn't a veteran carrying years of experience? When it's a 20-year-old worker, moving in the dark, doing the labor that makes other people's summit photos possible? What happened to Phura Gyaljen Sherpa may introduce another theory of what really killed Bijay Ghimire Bishwakarma. May 12th, the Lhotse Face. 11:20 p.m., just below Camp 3, nearly 7,000 meters above sea level. The wind cuts across the Lhotse Face in straight lines, because at that altitude, there is nothing left for it to bend around. Phura Gyaljen Sherpa is 20 years old. He is carrying gear from Camp 2 toward Camp 3. He is, by every account that survives him, exactly where he is supposed to be. He wasn't supposed to be a climber. He was supposed to be a monk. He had spent part of his childhood in a monastery in the Khumbu region before stepping away from the robes and into the harness. But the climbing was in his blood. His grandfather was Rita Sherpa, known to the mountaineering world as the Snow Leopard, one of the most legendary figures in the entire history of Himalayan climbing, a man who summited Mount Everest 10 separate times, every single one of those summits without supplemental oxygen. This was Phura Gyaljen's second season working on Everest. In 2025, his first year, he stood on the summit. He was, by every measurement Nepali mountaineering uses, a young man on his way to being one of the greats. On the night of May 12th, the Lhotse Face was going to take him anyway. The Lhotse Face is the wall that climbers on Everest's south side share with climbers on Lhotse, the world's fourth highest mountain, joined to Everest by the South Col. It is more than 1,000 meters of glacier ice, tilted at angles between 40 and 50 degrees, polished smooth by wind and time. You do not free climb the Lhotse Face. You ascend it on fixed ropes. You clip in. You stay clipped in. That is the single rule that keeps people alive on it. The Sherpa workers move up and down that face constantly during the build-up to a summit window. They run loads. They fix lines. They cache oxygen at the high camps. The clients sleep at base camp. The Sherpas sleep on the mountain. By May 12th, the 2026 season was racing. The route to the summit had finally been fixed. A team of high-altitude Sherpa climbers was about to reach the top in the next 36 hours, and a 5-day weather window was forecast to open on May 17th. Every piece of gear that needed to be on the South Col by then had to move now. So, Phura Gyaljen left Camp 2 after dark, carrying a load upward toward Camp 3. Sometime around 11:20 p.m., on a narrow section of the face below Camp 3, he unclipped from the safety rope. No one knows exactly why. It may have been to pass another climber. It may have been to clip past an anchor. It may have been to adjust gear. On the Lhotse Face, climbers unclip and reclip dozens of times in a single push. It is part of the job. It is also one of the most quietly dangerous parts of it. In the seconds he was off the rope, he slipped. The Lhotse Face does not forgive a slip. It is too steep, too smooth, too cold. He fell approximately 400 meters down the face. His body came to rest in a crevasse between Camp 2 and Camp 3. Other climbers and workers reached him. They carried his body to the helipad at Camp 2. He was airlifted off the mountain the following morning. He was the third Everest death of the 2026 season. He was 20 years old. He was the grandson of one of the greatest climbers Nepal has ever produced, and he died at night, alone for a moment, doing the work that makes Everest possible for everyone else. Two threads open. A veteran who died in a corridor he had memorized. A young worker who died in the seconds between two anchors. But what happens when the climber who dies has already won? When she has already stood on the summit? What happened to Shelley Johannesen may explain what holds all three of these deaths together. May 10th, Mount Makalu. Just below Camp 3, roughly 7,000 meters. Fresh snow up to the knees, wind hitting the slope at speeds that flatten anything that isn't tied down. Shelley Johannesen, descending from the summit she reached the day before, takes a step. She was 53 years old, a mother of 3, Hannah, Liam, and Ryan, a native Oregonian, a competitive adventure racer before she became a Himalayan mountaineer. With her partner, David Ashley, she had built a small, deliberately personal expedition company called Dash Adventures out of Kamas, Utah. Their model was not volume. It was not massive guided trains of clients hauled up the standard routes. It was carefully sized expeditions with people they knew. On May 9th, 2026, at 10:30 in the morning, Shelley Johannesen stood on the summit of Mount Makalu, the 5th highest mountain on the planet, 8,185 meters above the sea. Makalu is not Everest. It does not have the queue, the spectacle, the Hollywood ending. It has the thin air, it has the storms, and it has the avalanches. Johannesen's team, Johannesen, Ashley, and 2 Sherpa guides named Tawa and Phura Sonam, summited on the morning of May 9th and retreated down to a high camp for the night. Outside the tent, the weather changed. By some accounts, more than 30 inches of snow fell on the upper mountain in a matter of hours. The wind reportedly reached 60 miles per hour. The slopes above them and below them loaded with fresh, unstable snowpack. The exact recipe avalanche forecasters spend careers warning people about, in a place where the nearest avalanche forecaster does not exist. On the morning of May 10th, they began the descent from the Makalu Law. The route runs across exposed snow slopes, traversing wind-loaded terrain on the way back down toward Camp 3. They were moving down a section of fixed line, somewhere between 300 and 400 meters of rope set into the slope by climbers who had passed through earlier in the season, when the snow was a different mountain entirely. Just below Camp 3, near 7,000 meters, the slope released. David Ashley would later describe seeing a crack form to his left in the seconds before the slab broke. There was no time to do anything about it. The avalanche took the fixed rope with it. It carried the entire team down the mountain, roughly 1,000 to 1,300 vertical feet, by some accounts, through terrain that pitches and turns and accelerates anything moving across it. Other climbers from Camp 2 ran toward the debris. They reached Phura Sherpa first and pulled him out alive. They reached David Ashley and Tawa Sherpa, both injured, both alive. They reached Shelley Johannesen too late. She died at the site. Ashley and Tawa Sherpa were eventually evacuated by helicopter and flown to Kathmandu for medical care. Phura Sonam survived. Shelley Johannesen, mother, adventure racer, expedition leader, summiteer of the world's 5th highest mountain, did not. She had been on top of the mountain less than 24 hours earlier. A British psychologist named James Reason spent his career studying why complex systems fail: hospitals, nuclear plants, commercial airliners. In 1990, he gave the world a metaphor that is now used everywhere, from surgical safety to defense in depth. He called it the Swiss cheese model. Imagine, Reason said, a series of defenses standing between a hazard and a disaster. Each defense is a slice of Swiss cheese. Each slice has holes. The holes are not in the same place on every slice. That's the entire point. Most of the time, when a hazard slips through one hole, the next slice blocks it. But every once in a while, every hole lines up, and the hazard passes through every layer. That is when people die. Look at Bijay Ghimire Bishwakarma. He had multiple Everest summits behind him. He had local knowledge no foreign expedition leader on the mountain could match. The safety system around him was as strong as any high-altitude worker has ever had. But in 2026, the holes lined up. A season delayed by a serac, a route compressed by record permit numbers, a 4 a.m. push through the icefall, a heart pushed to the edge of its design envelope. He had survived every one of those holes before. This time, they were all open at once. Phura Gyaljen Sherpa, 20 years old, was working inside the same compressed season. The fixed rope was a slice. His harness was a slice. His training was a slice. The protocol that says you stay clipped in on the Lhotse Face was a slice. For the seconds he was unclipped, to move, to adjust, to pass, every slice opened at the same time. He slipped once. The mountain did the rest. Shelley Johannesen had the most experienced team, the most personal style of expedition, the best possible philosophy of climbing in the Himalaya. The summit was already behind her. She had won, but a storm dropped 30 inches of snow overnight. The slope loaded. The fixed line ran across the most dangerous part of it, and on the descent, the slices lined up for her too. None of these three died because of one mistake. They died because the mountain, the weather, the schedule, and the human body all failed at the same time. That is what the Himalaya does. It rarely kills with a single hole. It waits for the holes to line up. If you made it this far, do me a favor. Of these three deaths, the veteran in the icefall, the young Sherpa on the Lhotse Face, the summit climber on Makalu, which one do you think was the most preventable? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them.